In the annals of military history, few names command the reverence accorded to Sun Tzu. More than 2 millennia after his death, generals study his teachings, corporate executives apply his strategies, and nations structure their defense doctrines around his principles. The Art of War, his masterwork of 13 chapters, remains the most influential military treatise ever written. Yet the man behind these timeless strategies emerges from the mists of ancient China as both historical figure and legend, a philosopher-warrior whose insights transcended the battlefield to reshape human understanding of conflict itself. Born around 544 BCE, during China's tumultuous spring and autumn period, Sun Wu, later known as Sun Tzu, meaning Master Sun, entered a world defined by perpetual warfare. The once mighty Zhou dynasty had fractured into competing states, each vying for supremacy through increasingly sophisticated military campaigns. His birthplace, the state of Qi, stood among the most powerful of these warring kingdoms, its prosperity built upon agricultural abundance and strategic coastal position. The young Sun Wu grew up surrounded by military advisors, court strategists, and the constant preparation for war that characterized this era of Chinese history. The formative influences shaping Sun Tzu's strategic mind extended far beyond military matters. His education encompassed classical Chinese philosophy, particularly the teachings of Laozi and the emerging principles of Taoism. This philosophical foundation would prove crucial as it emphasized harmony, balance, and the concept of Wu Wei, achieving victory through minimal action. Ancient texts suggest his family possessed considerable wealth and influence, allowing him access to the finest tutors and military texts of his time. These early years instilled in him a deep understanding of both Eastern philosophy and practical statecraft, a combination that would distinguish his later strategic thinking. Sun Tzu's rise to prominence began with his departure from Qi and subsequent service to King Helü of Wu, an ambitious ruler seeking to expand his kingdom's influence. Historical records indicate that Sun Tzu arrived at the Wu court around 512 BCE, presenting himself as a military theorist capable of transforming the kingdom's martial capabilities. His initial reception proved skeptical, as court officials questioned whether a scholar could truly understand the brutal realities of warfare. The king, however, recognized potential in this philosopher-strategist and granted him the opportunity to demonstrate his theories in practice. The legendary test of Sun Tzu's abilities involved training the king's concubines in military discipline, a story that reveals both his strategic acumen and unwavering commitment to his principles. When the women failed to follow orders during the drill, treating the exercise as mere entertainment, Sun Tzu ordered the execution of 2 of the king's favorites to establish discipline. Despite the king's protests, Sun Tzu carried out the punishment, declaring that a general must maintain absolute authority over his forces. The remaining concubines performed flawlessly thereafter, and King Helü, though disturbed by the demonstration, recognized the effectiveness of Sun Tzu's methods. Beyond his public role as military advisor, Sun Tzu maintained a notably private personal life, reflecting the Taoist principle of humility and self-effacement. Unlike many generals of his era, he avoided ostentatious displays of wealth or power, preferring to influence events from behind the scenes. His relationships with subordinates emphasized mentorship rather than domination, creating a network of loyal officers who implemented his strategies throughout Wu's military campaigns. Historical sources suggest he married and had descendants, though details remain scarce, as he deliberately avoided the court intrigues and political maneuvering that consumed many of his contemporaries. The military campaigns that established Sun Tzu's reputation unfolded across the complex political landscape of 6th century China, where shifting alliances and territorial ambitions created constant opportunities for conflict. His first major victory came against the state of Chu, Wu's powerful western neighbor, in a campaign that demonstrated his mastery of deception and psychological warfare. Rather than engaging Chu's superior forces directly, Sun Tzu orchestrated a series of feints and strategic retreats that lured the enemy into disadvantageous positions. The campaign culminated in the capture of Chu's capital, a triumph achieved with minimal casualties that validated his philosophy of winning without fighting. The principles underlying Sun Tzu's military success found their most complete expression in The Art of War, a treatise that synthesized decades of battlefield experience into a coherent strategic philosophy. Written during his service to Wu, the work comprised 13 chapters addressing every aspect of warfare, from initial planning to post-victory administration. Unlike contemporary military manuals that focused on tactics and formations, the art of war emphasized the psychological and philosophical dimensions of conflict. Sun Tzu argued that superior strategy could overcome superior numbers, that knowing one's enemy and oneself guaranteed victory, and that the highest form of warfare involved defeating opponents without battle. The strategic concepts outlined in the art of war revolutionized military thinking through their emphasis on intelligence gathering, adaptability, and the economy of force. Sun Tzu stressed that warfare represented merely the continuation of politics by other means, requiring commanders to understand diplomatic, economic, and social factors alongside purely military considerations. His famous maxim that all warfare is based on deception reflected a sophisticated understanding of information as a weapon, centuries before modern concepts of psychological operations emerged. These principles guided Wu's expansion throughout the region, establishing it as the turning point in Sun Tzu's career arrived with Wu's campaign against the state of Yue, a conflict that would ultimately test the limits of his strategic philosophy. Despite initial successes, the campaign devolved into a prolonged struggle that drained Wu's resources and exposed the kingdom to attacks from other directions. Sun Tzu found himself caught between his strategic principles, which counseled against extended campaigns, and political pressure to achieve decisive victory. The conflict revealed the challenges of implementing ideal strategy within the constraints of political reality, as even the most brilliant military mind could not overcome fundamental resource limitations. Historical records regarding Sun Tzu's final years remain fragmentary, reflecting his preference for operating away from the spotlight of court politics. Evidence suggests he gradually withdrew from active military service, focusing instead on teaching and refining his strategic theories. Some sources indicate he lived to see Wu's eventual decline following King Helü's death, though he played no role in the political struggles that weakened the kingdom. His death, likely occurring around 496 BCE, passed without the elaborate ceremonies typically accorded to successful generals, consistent with his lifelong philosophy of achieving greatness through subtle influence rather than public acclaim. The immediate aftermath of Sun Tzu's death saw the art of war preserved and transmitted through military academies and scholarly institutions throughout China. Subsequent dynasties recognized the treatise's value, with generals from the Han through the Tang period studying and applying its principles in their campaigns. The work's influence extended beyond China's borders, reaching Japan, Korea, and eventually the Islamic world through trade and diplomatic contacts. Medieval military theorists incorporated Sun Tzu's concepts into their own strategic thinking, though often without recognizing their Chinese origins. The modern rediscovery of Sun Tzu began during the Enlightenment, when European scholars first encountered Chinese philosophical and military texts through Jesuit missionaries and early sinologists. Napoleon Bonaparte reportedly studied the art of war during his campaigns, though historical evidence for this remains disputed. The work gained wider Western attention following its translation into French in 1772 and subsequent English versions in the 19th century. Military academies across Europe and America began incorporating Sun Tzu's principles into their curricula, recognizing their relevance to contemporary warfare. The 20th century witnessed an explosion of interest in Sun Tzu's strategic philosophy, driven by two world wars that demonstrated the continued relevance of his insights. Military leaders from Mao Zedong to Douglas MacArthur cited the art of war as influential in their strategic thinking, applying its principles to conflicts ranging from guerrilla warfare to nuclear deterrence. The work's emphasis on information warfare and psychological operations proved particularly prescient in an era of mass media and propaganda campaigns. Modern military doctrine continues to reflect Sun Tzu's emphasis on achieving strategic objectives through means other than direct confrontation. Beyond military applications, Sun Tzu's principles found new relevance in business strategy, diplomacy, and competitive sports during the late 20th century. Corporate executives discovered that his concepts of positioning, timing, and competitive advantage translated directly to market competition. Diplomatic theorists applied his insights about knowing one's opponents and achieving objectives through negotiation rather than conflict. This broader application demonstrates the universal nature of his strategic thinking, transcending the specific military context for which it was originally developed. The enduring legacy of Sun Tzu lies not merely in the continued study of the art of war, but in the fundamental transformation of how humanity approaches conflict and competition. His insight that the supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting has influenced everything from Cold War strategy to modern cyber warfare. The principle that victory belongs to those who know when to fight and when not to fight continues to guide decision-makers facing complex strategic challenges. In an era where traditional military force often proves insufficient to achieve political objectives, Sun Tzu's emphasis on intelligence, patience, and indirect approaches remains more relevant than ever, ensuring his position as history's greatest strategic thinker.